I'm not joking. That was one of the projects of some young people that I knew. But $1 million grant to come up with a plan to abolish poverty. And, you know, the business degrees have been terrifically influential in, quote, adjusting the economy, reducing costs by terminating people, by charging more. You know, they're the ones who pull the levers. I think it'd be cool to get some wealthy Wesleyan to do that, to go to Cox and say, let's make this a graduate degree project.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the powers of capitalism, right? Mm-hmm. You can pay people to do right.
Yeah.
So let's try that. You know, let's just pay people to do right.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good step. But after reading this book, I spent some time trying to bring those numbers at $20 billion a year up to date with consumer price index and such. And if we had taken the $1 trillion that we spent in Iraq in the last 10 years and given out $100 billion a year, which is the CPI number for Dr. King's 20.
Yeah.
If we had simply done that, then according to his formula, we would have eliminated poverty. Now, that's not a transition. That's jumping to the end. You know, we can't get there without some kind of transition, like how to eliminate policy. But I believe if that money had stayed in the United States and rattled around, then we could have eliminated.
Well, one thing we've learned is that trickle down doesn't trickle down far enough. Okay,
it's got to come.
That's right. We need bubble up instead of trickle down.
Yeah.
And you know, one of my favorite anti-poverty fantasies is this. I haven't had an opportunity to execute it, but maybe you can help me. Me and a half a dozen of my billionaire friends get together, and we've got a long list of names and addresses of people who live in poor neighborhoods. You know, once upon a time it would have been from the phone book, but I don't know if the phone books are adequate to that task anymore. But anyway, somehow or another, we come up with names and addresses of everybody who's earning less than $50,000 a year, and that might include some of us. And then we get a giant stack of checks and commence to writing checks. Okay? So imagine this, you know, next morning people walk to the mailbox and they pull it out and they see a check for $400,000 from Theo Walker and his friends. Okay? Well, if I'm the one holding that check, my poverty is immediately abolished. Okay? I am no longer poor at that moment. Now that's going to solve a lot of my problems instantly. Okay? Now, because I'm a creative individual, I can create some problematic ways to spend that money and maybe end up in poverty again. And, you know, maybe my poverty will need to be abolished again in 50 years. But there are a great many of us who would use that check in clearly productive ways. In fact, there are so many of us who would use it in clearly productive ways that I'm willing to pay the cost of those who would do otherwise for the sake of the general social good. But, you know, that's just my fantasy. I trust you'll have other fantasies that would work even better. Yes, sir.
Well, one question, one thing you mentioned about what can happen at the grassroots, and I think about one of the books that we've discussed before, but Whitehead, I believe, who discusses the way in which we see each other, in that society depends on that underclass, that impoverished class of people to do the things or to serve us in ways. And in his discussion of that, you know, it brings up the notion of how we see each other and how we treat each other. If I can use that as an example, I lived in New Orleans in the 80s, and there was a restaurant that I would go to called Chez Aline, and the owner of that restaurant found a way to take New Orleans public school children and teach them their work and develop them such that their next step in life would not be a step, hopefully, in poverty. At least they had something to hold on, something to elevate them. And they did it by just employing them and having them see themselves as professional persons working in an industry as opposed to a student with a part-time job after school pouring water. And I think a lot of times we see each other in those ways. The persons that serve us, the person that maybe if I can use it as a term, perhaps derogatory now, does our lawn. The influence, the social capital we have with our neighbors and with our friends, that culture has to change. In order for us to take seriously the notion that we can take steps towards abolishing poverty, abolishing the lack of dignity that those who are impoverished have.
Well said. Well said. Yes, sir. Mr. Johnson.
Well,
The other wealthy person.
well, I got a couple of you. Of course, thank you. You know, there are a couple of things I want to say. First is regarding the question of accomplishing the impossible. I think that I personally I owe a debt to my friend Joel Pugh. To get this book back in print, I thought it was impossible. I mean, when he first started pushing to find a way to get this particular book back in print, I didn't think that would ever happen for a whole lot of reasons. One is the King family did not have no inkling of an idea of what this book was about.
They were embarrassed by that Black Power stuff.
Yeah, not only that, Dr. King, his first book, Where Do We Go From Here, basically dealt with civil rights. The whole question of the problems of America's apartheid system in the South. This book challenged America. The other thing I wanted to put on the table was Dr. King did not start talking about the problems of poverty in 1967. As a young civil rights worker working at SCLC, at some point, everybody had to go to India, Calcutta, and New Delhi and study what was called the Untouchables. I went to India. But if you wait for Martin Luther King in the early 60s, he sent everybody on trips to India to take a look at the poverty in New Delhi and Calcutta, which was fascinating that years later he would come back to the poverty. The other thing is there's a relationship between Dwight David Eisenhower and Martin Luther King. And that relationship is Eisenhower's farewell address was, be aware of the military-industrial complex. Dr. King understood later in his life that there's a relationship between America's propensity for violence and poverty, and that you can't deal with America's problems of poverty or the world's problems of poverty without addressing the problems of our commitment to the violence, and that the world's resources, if you look at the 50 industrial nations, the resources is committed to killing. And Martin understood that we have to address his last day on earth, April 4, 1968. He sent for the young men, Bernard Lafayette and all of us young men. And he said he wanted to institutionalize nonviolence in the world. Tremendous meeting in his room that day in Memphis, that he wanted to take nonviolence and institutionalize it and force independent school districts to teach nonviolence from the first grade to the 12th grade, colleges and universities to teach the whole question of nonviolence, because he saw the relationship between poverty and violence. And I see it every day in the inner city and the people I work with on a daily basis.
Wow. Thank you. I did not know that. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes, yes.
There are many poor people who work. They have jobs. They just don't make enough money to escape their poverty condition. So wouldn't and even some conservatives endorse this, an expansion of the earned income tax credit be one way to help these types of poor people.
Direct payment to the poor.
Just the earned income tax credit, it goes to working, it's a wage supplement, what it amounts to.
I'm certain that would help. I'm not familiar with any programs that are so high-minded as to say this is part of an effort to abolish poverty. But I have good reason to believe that that would help, and at a minimum, we should push for that. But those of us who are inspired by the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, okay, that population needs to have much more ambitious visions.
But as a transition step, if we multiply that times 5, that's a good transition step.
Sure is, yeah. But I want more than that. I want zero poverty on the planet. And we live on a fabulously wealthy planet. I mean, the problem is not lack of resources, it's not lack of money, you know, it's a bunch of other things, and we need to...
There's plenty of food in the world to feed everybody.
That's right, that's right. I'm told that that the world depends upon our consumption of beef to get rid of the food surpluses.
But let me just say this, and I make a lot of this because of my mouth. There's a neurosis inside the church. Example is, First Baptist Church in downtown Dallas is going to invest $100 and some million to build a building. I think that's a sin in the context of what's surrounding downtown Dallas. In the black community, within a probably a 5-mile radius, we've got probably $500 million invested in buildings that we have the audacity to call churches. Nobody questions that except me, and of course, I don't. Everybody's mad with me anyway, so that's all right. But there's a unique neurosis in the church itself when it comes to their responsibility to the poor.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason we've kind of dropped the habit of saying good news to the poor and just saying good news. Okay. It's because we recognize that the good news we're bringing is not particularly good news to the poor. Yes, please.
Well, I was just thinking, I can't recall, was it E.F. Schumacher, this is kind of the opposite of what you're saying, who was proposing giving a check to all the CEOs, just getting them out of their business because they do such mischief to the whole planet. So kind of give those guys out and just give them a check so that they can get out of it and live. But he was playing with the opposite, so just kind of give everybody, get them out of poverty.
Well, I'm not familiar with that proposal, but on first bounce, it sounds like another version of paying people to do right. Okay, and you know, if there are people who need to get out of the way, if we make it profitable for them to get out of the way, they'll get out of the way. And so if it comes to that, let's do that. You know, the capitalist in me is fully willing to pay people to do right. You know, and if that's their only motive for doing right, that's okay with me. Let's just get some righteousness going here.